So my thesis is about the empathic effects of auditory heartbeats, a neurophysiological investigation. I'm in the brain music lab, and so in addition to this work, I'm going to be tying in what I'm doing to music and the musical beat. So when I listen to music, I've noticed a few things. One is that the heart is a prominent lyrical metaphor of feeling. It is commonly used in lyrics, and in general, love and feelings are feature very prominently in popular music. Also, almost every single piece of music has a beat, and that beat happens to have a similar tempo as the human heartbeat. I'm not sure why that is. Music is shared and social. When we listen to music, often it's lyrical. We're hearing actually other people speaking to us. We can also listen to music as if it were a person, their body in particular. So here's some motivating questions. Why is the heart a prominent metaphor for feeling? When do we feel with music? Why does the beat of music resemble a auditory heartbeat? Sorry, take this off the screen if I can. Great. Okay. So the outline for my talk is I'm going to give a background followed by experimental description. I have three different kinds of results. One is behavioral. Another one is the effects on your heart rate. Then the effects on your EEG. So the background. So these days, there's a lot of wearable physiological sensors that abound, and we also have a context where we would like to communicate with others that are far away from us. In particular, we might want to have some sort of intimacy and closeness with them. So here's an example of a physiological signal sharing. This is the digital touch app on Apple Watch, and if you place two fingers on it, it will measure your heartbeat and then send a visualization of your heartbeat to another person. Researchers have been exploring this in detail. A lot of them have been using, also you could imagine this being as part of a text message. However, common experiences of the heartbeat are auditory and vibrational. And so this thesis explores that modality. The researchers, though, have understood heart rate sharing as having kind of two important dimensions. One is heart rate as information, which is telling you something about the person. The other one is heart rate as connection. This is referring to that intimacy or a feeling of connectedness to a person when I interact with their heart. This poses the question of, can heart rate sharing be an effective empathic technology? To answer that question, we need to know what empathy is. Empathy is defined as the ability to understand and share the feelings of another from their perspective. So I'm recognizing your feelings, and that recognition or that your feelings are causing a feeling inside of me. That is empathy. There's thought to be two types. One is cognitive, where we understand the perspective of someone else, and the other one is affective. This is thought to be more low level, might underlie some of the contagion responses that we see between infants and their caretakers. And there's behavioral correlates that we can measure. So for example, mimicry, entrainment, contagion, these are motor things. There's also beneath the skin neurophysiological correlates. So these are changes in EEG, ECG, EDA, and many other physiological signals. So this thesis in particular is wondering if we can use something about music to create empathy. Music is already very empathic. It's incredibly social. Group musicking is happening almost all the time. Music has the ability to synchronize bodies and moods. When we dance to each other, we become in sync. Our moods also become synchronized. It's been shown that making music actually increases affiliation, cohesion, and teamwork. These changes are supported by changes in neurochemistry, which decrease our arousal, increase our pro-social behaviors. In general, it's been shown that when you involve children in an empathetic or a musical group interaction, this actually increases their empathic abilities and empathic traits. And some people have even said that this group capacity of music contributes to its evolutionary function. That's to say, music evolved, and we have music because of these social effects. Music is also present in listening by itself, apart from everyone else. Your empathic ability has been shown to be predictive of your musical preferences. It also predicts your ability to synchronize with others. And also music is an embodied expression. Whenever we hear music, we understand instruments, we understand performers, and the expression itself is referring to expressing something, usually coming from another person. Music expression is an empathy. So we can empathize with the performer on stage or the composer. Oh, hey, do you want to come? You want to the top? Yes.
Oh, sorry,
This is Anton. And then also music can have a virtual persona. That is the idea that listening to music itself can, even in the abstract of any lyrics or any performer, represent, or you can imagine as if it's a person. So the question is, can we actually use physiology to, or how can we use music in this way? So the practice of biomusic, or generating music from biosignals, is something that goes back to the 60s. Roughly as soon as we could use these sorts of signals for making music, we started to do that. This has actually transitioned into a more of a research and clinical intervention stage. So here's an example of a musical mapping that was used to treat or to enhance the communicative abilities of people with autism. And so they've mapped electrodermal activity to melodic pitch, skin temperature to key change, blood volume pulse to tempo, respiration to a whoosh sound. And then you can do interesting human studies, human factors research with this. But this mapping can take any sort of form. For me, I'm really interested in whether listening to the physiology of a person will actually create a physiological change in me. So listening to this person's brain, for example, does that create a change in my brain? Or listening to their heart create a change in my heart? If it does, it's probably through an induced emotional response. Music is full of structural cues. One of the most important ones is its beat. This interacts with empathy through some particular empathic mechanisms, for example, emotional contagion and rhythmic entrainment. So our perception of a fast beat can create a contagion response in us, or we can dance to it. And when these things come together, they create an affective change. That change occurs in the change of our affective perspective on what that person is experiencing. It can also create a change in terms of our felt and induced emotional response. So for this research, the question is, can just one musical variable in isolation create this change? Hey, come on, Brian. So does hearing the heartbeat of another person increase listeners' empathy with that person and change their cardiac physiology? And I'm using cardiac physiology because I'm actually studying more than just your heart. I'm also studying your brain's response to your heart. I think the demos will start in Gil's lab. Yeah.
You said the second question was increase your cardiac physiology?
Change your cardiac physiology. So your heart, but also your attention and your perception of your heart. Attention and perception of heart. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the experiment description. Our hypothesis is that listening to the heartbeat of another person will change empathic state, hypothesis 1, listener's heart rate, hypothesis 2, and their cardiac cortical processing, which we're going to measure with EEG. That's hypothesis 3. We have a heartbeat model. I use SuperCollider for this, which gives me control of the BPM. And I also create a sort of static temporal and loudness variability for increased realism. We start off with a single heartbeat sample. And then from this sample, we can trigger and trigger again and create slow sounds, fast sounds, and modulations. And then see what happens to listeners when this happens. Okay, so measuring empathic state, I'm using a tool called the Reading the Mind and the Eyes task. This is a collection of 36 different eyes, and each eye has a question, which is, what is this person feeling? And so in this case, you have four possibilities, and every trial, every question, you have to pick one.
I guess, so I did want to go back on slide. Sure. So the composition of this heartbeat sample.
Yeah.
Like where did you come up with this? Or I guess what was the emphasis for designing this like in this way in particular?
As a heartbeat, or?
I'm guessing, like, is that the auditory representation that best matches the heartbeat?
Yeah, it's an auditory representation. It's kind of like a stethoscope, but it'll sound a little bit different. This is much like louder.
Okay. Because me being so removed, I'm like, okay, like this it sounds like a heartbeat, but I'm assuming within your community,
yeah,
there's like some auditory traits that might be possessed in a sample like that. So I'm like, okay,
yeah,
I hear it, but maybe you're.
Those definitely exist. Previous research has shown that of those traits, only the tempo really matters for effective perception. At least it's the trait that matters the most. For example, temporal variability is another possibility, but it doesn't matter as much for listeners. Okay, so so I'm enhancing this test with heartbeats. So here's another person's set of eyes, and they're hearing the heartbeat now. Here's another person's set of eyes, and I'm seeing like, relative to for this trial versus a trial without heartbeats or with fast heartbeats, are there changes in empathy? So we have two types of responses. One is their cognitive empathy. What is this person feeling? That's your perspective. The other one is affective empathy. How well did you feel what they were feeling? So that's really getting into the shared affective question. Okay, so here's the experiment protocol. We have 4 different stimulus types. Those last 20 seconds, there's 20 seconds of exposure followed by 10 seconds of silence. The 10 seconds is for a baseline reading. And then the 2 questions are positioned within each of these trials.
Randomized?
Yeah, they were randomized. I might include that on another slide. Here's what it was kind of like. This is an audio-only condition.
And so, because students or participants were asked to like choose one of those, I don't know what consent means.
Actually, if you hold your mouse over a button, a definition will pop up. Okay. Yeah. So that was a nice part of it. So this is an audiovisual fast condition, and their question is, what is this person feeling? And so they answer terrified, but maybe they were aghast earlier or something like that. I do have that, but not on this slide. You mean like a number of people?
Yeah,
demographics.
Yeah. You know, a black person looking at some person, a white person versus somebody looking at a black person. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
Like from the talk last week, you know what I mean? Like
demographics.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or be like interesting to see that.
Yeah. Okay. So I did a random matching of eyes and heartbeats. That means that sometimes the heartbeats will match the eyes, and sometimes they won't. And so I'm calling that audiovisual congruency. Here's the 36 answers, or 36 possibilities. I sort the answers according to their arousal. This is some separate research, which is actually just based upon the effective content of words. But from this, I get 2 groups. A low arousal group and a high arousal group. And in the low arousal group, a slow heartbeat is congruent and a fast heartbeat is incongruent. And in a high arousal group, a slow heartbeat is incongruent and a fast heartbeat is congruent. And so this is the breakdown of that. There's 36 trials by those 4 fundamental conditions. And then from that, we have 3 separate perceptual, cognitive differences. One is the modality, visual only, audio visual. Visual only is kind of like a control condition, like how things are normally. There's 2 tempo, slow and fast. So we have a pretty easy way of differentiating those. And then in the audiovisual conditions, we have congruent and incongruent.
You have arousal, not null, but
a null space?
Yeah.
A middle space? Yeah.
Okay.
That was right. It doesn't. Those don't get included in the audio.
Oh, they didn't get included. Okay.
Yeah. So those kind of go away in that part. All right. And so this is the technical setup. We have this is a brain vision ActiChamp, which allows us to synchronize 64-channel EEG with a heart rate measurement. So those are automatically synchronized. And then we have an audio interface and amplifier, which are actually we're putting in that into the amplifier as well. You could synchronize that a different way too. And then I'm using some software. Brain Vision Recorder is the acquisition software for the EEG. I made my own experiment code in Super Collider, which I synchronized with the incoming data using something called lab streaming layer. So let's get to the results, behavioral results. First of all, the changes in cognitive empathy. What is this person feeling? So we have, for this, the change in RMET emotion selection. So if they chose panicked in the fast heartbeat condition or in the visual-only condition, do they subsequently change their response when they hear a slow heartbeat or a fast heartbeat? And so it's a binary change or no change. And we compare that to a pretrial baseline. They get all these sets of eyes at the beginning in like a normal way. Okay, so this is a modality effect. We're comparing visual only to audio-visual effects. And on the left is the percentage of change in the RMAT variable. And so this was a significant effect. It's that hearing someone's heartbeat changes the listener's perspective on that person's affect. Okay, let's look at congruency. This is a comparison of visual only on the left, AV congruent in the middle, and AV incongruent on the right. And this is tracking, again, the RMET change variable. This is showing a significant effect. When the emotion in the heartbeat does not match the emotion in the eyes, listeners will change their perspective. There's also effects of tempo. So on the left is the visual only, in the middle is the slow audiovisual condition, and on the right is the fast audiovisual condition. And what we see is a significant increase or increase in change. So it seems that fast heartbeats are driving this change in perspective. So how about differences in affective empathy? We have a question here. What were they feeling? How well did you feel what they were feeling? This is a 7-point scale. And I actually normalized this per participant. We have the normal, just the raw data, but we normalized it so each participant's mean is the same, which is at 0. This kind of deals with some of the bias effects. But anyway, so this is a graph of the visual only versus the audio only versus the audio visual condition in this feeling strength, how well they felt what they were feeling. And there was a significant effect. In particular, hearing someone's heartbeat increased listeners' ratings of feeling what they were feeling. What's really interesting to me about this, not only did the heartbeat seem to increase affective empathy, but the audio-only condition, hearing someone's heartbeat by itself without even seeing any eyes, has an equal amount of affective empathy. This is actually something that's been shown in previous work too.
So say that one more time. So basically, not having the visual information.
Yeah, it's comparable. So seeing someone's eyes or hearing their heartbeat and not seeing their eyes have similar levels of affective empathy.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Okay, so now looking at congruency. This is a comparison of the visual only, audio only, and the audio visual incongruent, audio visual congruent. And there was a significant effect here. Particular heartbeats whose tempo matched the visual affect in the eyes produced the highest ratings of affective empathy. So this is kind of an expected result to me. When there's some sort of difference between those two conditions, we have a little bit of a reduction in affective empathy, but still significantly more than the baseline visual only condition. So it's almost like it doesn't even have to match, it'll increase affective empathy.
So it sounds like people are, when it's incorrect, they're like, this doesn't match what my initial thoughts were about what they were perceiving, how they were feeling. So you see something, we're doing some type of correction, see what they might be. And this, I guess in the scenarios when it's incorrect.
Yeah, well, I don't use the term incorrect because they're not, but when they're incongruent, then there's a mismatch. Like they might look really scared in their eyes, but then you hear a slow heartbeat. And the question is like how that will change your cognitive empathy. But what this is showing is that also reduces your affective empathy, your co-feeling with that person. But it's still actually greater than without the heartbeat. Okay. And there was also important tempo effects. So this is a comparison of visual only, audio only slow, audio only fast, and audio visual slow and audio visual fast. And there was a significant difference. In particular, there was no difference between the fast and the slow heartbeats, except when there were no visuals. So we should be mindful that when we're sending someone a heartbeat without any visual context, that there will probably be an affective empathy with tempo. Okay, so summary, when participants heard the heartbeat of another person, their cognitive empathy changed. Their affective empathy increased, and these differences in empathic state were due to the heartbeat tempo. And I'm also, I guess I can include congruency there, but I kind of, in some way, congruency is really related to tempo. Whether the tempo is fast or slow with the same pair of eyes creates different effects. I did it just because I thought it was like nicer to like not have another word there, but I think I should just for. Okay, I'll do that later. Okay, moving on to the ECG results. Okay, so heart rate measurement. The heart is in the chest, and we have these three sensors which are recording a difference in voltage between the positive and negative, or up here and down there. And to figure out the heart rate, we simply find the R peaks. The R peaks are these points here. We measure the time in between those, and then we do windowing of that, so we can hear the heart rate over time. We can hear the heart rate over time. We have a baseline. So this is kind of what it looks like. Their heart is beating all the time. They get a stimulus, which is a heartbeat, and we look for changes that occur in this interval. I did a lot of piloting before I started this work, and one of the important findings from this was that the heart rate shifted towards the auditory tempo. So a fast heartbeat created faster heart rates than slower heartbeats. So this was the tempo was causing the listener's heart rate to shift. Also, there was an interaction between empathy and tempo. In particular, there were heart rate differences between high and low empathy trials. This is a standardized like Z-score grouping, but the solid blue lines here are the high empathy conditions. The striped lines are the low empathy condition. We see an increase in heart rate, and also important differences. The red is the fast, the blue is the slow. There's a difference that is additionally due to the tempo. Okay, so that was the context going in. We know that whatever effects we're looking for can be seen in roughly 20 seconds, which is actually a lot lower than a lot of other studies. So what we found is that the effect of hearing. So this is a plot of the heart rate versus the visual only, the audio only, and the audio visual condition. And on the y-axis is the change in heart rate from baseline for the 10 seconds before the trial started. We're looking at differences there. And so what we can see is that there is, the dotted line in the middle is the baseline. So there was no change in heart rate due to the visual only condition. The heart rate didn't change. However, for both of the audio conditions, the audio only and the audio visual, heart rates decreased. This was a significant effect. Okay, this is a plot of this is the same plot, but a comparison of low affective empathy and high affective empathy. Yeah.
I think, so for me, immediately, it kind of makes sense to me that just looking at somebody outside, even though you told me that it doesn't already, I'm like, okay, that kind of makes sense. When you get the audio only, we expect to change, but when you get the audio and visual, I thought it was going to actually be far greater than just the visual.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any, I guess, like any rationale why you think that be the case?
Yeah, we'll get to that, but
Okay.
But yeah, I think for whatever reason, this sort of listening experience, this empathic listening experience, they're not mindful that they're not moving. They're just like sitting down, and this is only the first 20 seconds. We have a difference. But so I think that if it were a longer period of time, if there was some motion, if there was an actual real person, we would see differences as well.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I think to me, so we'll get to this later, but I think that it's actually the amount of attention to the heartbeat. Might be also another explanation of that. Okay, so I also compare the affective empathy and found a significant, so this is visual only, audio only, and audio visual. And this is the change in heart rate from baseline. And we found a significant difference between low empathy and high empathy in the audio-only condition that did not exist in the visual-only or the audio-visual condition. So there's something very special about when we're giving all of our attention to the heartbeat. Okay, and in particular, high empathy was significantly greater than low empathy in the audio-only condition. There were differences in heart rate that were due to congruency as well. So this is a comparison of the AV incongruent and the AV congruent and their change in heart rate from baseline. Both have decreased. However, when the AV condition is congruent, when they match each other, there's a significantly higher heart rate than when it's incongruent in the audiovisual condition. So based upon our previous findings with effective empathy, it seems that an increase in effective empathy has the effect of increasing heart rate relative to the same modality and the same modality. Okay. We looked for changes in tempo, but did not see any. And we were kind of surprised by this because we had seen it in all of our piloting. However, we realized that there were 144 trials, and all of our piloting had only 36 trials, and so we hypothesized that there might be fatigue effects. So this experiment was actually about an hour and a half long, and our previous experiments were only like 15 to 20 minutes. So, and that is exactly what we saw. So this is a comparison of this is just only in the audio-only condition, and it was specific to the audio-only condition. But a fast heartbeat was associated with a relatively higher heart rate than the slow auditory heartbeat condition in the audio-only thing. So in general, both of these are showing a decrease in heart rate, but the fast heartbeat is associated with a relatively higher heart rate. And these differences were present early in the study. So here's a summary of the heart rate results. When participants heard the heartbeat of another person, their heart rate decreased. There were additional differences in heart rate due to the heartbeat tempo and their empathy. Okay, finally, the EEG results. So I'm using something called the heartbeat evoked potential here. The heartbeat evoked potential tracks is actually an evoked potential, which is time aligned to your heartbeat. So in a situation where you have a synchronized electrocardiogram signal and an EEG signal, you can actually analyze the EEG by epoching and centering it around the RP. And that's what the heartbeat evoked potential does. And so when you do that, you can kind of see how, you can see the RP here. You have to remove that cardiac artifact. And once you've done that, everything else is EEG signal. And what's been interesting to find is that there have been differences between different conditions that have aligned to that. So in particular, the HEP is a marker of internal heartbeat perception. If you were to ask someone to count their heartbeats without taking their pulse in just a silent room, people who perform well at this task have more positive HEPs in their frontal regions than people who don't perform well. Also, this same effect is present with respect to real-time attention. So when people are distracted, their HEP becomes more negative. This has also been shown to relate to self-consciousness, the effective judgment of faces, which is the Fukushima et al., and also emotional valence of visual scenes. In particular, it seems that when we observe someone else or make an effective judgment of someone else, this increases our own HEP, makes it more negative. And so we hypothesize that adding the heartbeat of someone else, because of our results that have shown that it increases effective empathy, that this will also create a more negative HEP relative to the visual-only condition, reflecting that our attention has shifted. So in order to do this, we have to clean the EEG. This includes downsampling, high passing, removing the line noise. We identify and remove bad channels. We clean the data channel by channel using something called artifact subspace rejection. We interpolate the removed channels and re-reference all the EEG back to a common mode average. We do that for each participant. We also run independent component analysis, which is a way of trying to find individual subcomponents in the EEG. we do that across the whole experiment, and then after we run the ICA, we epoch around the R peak, which is how you compute the heartbeat evoked potential. After that, we also take the step of modeling dipoles to components, which is basically a way of trying to figure out where in the brain something has occurred. And then we cluster components across participants in order to compare them. And I'm using something called EEG Lab Study for EEG Lab for all of this. And they have a study component which allows us to compute ICA features across all subjects, cluster them by similarity, and then look at the results. And so here's an example of 16 components of this. And right away, we can see a very clear heartbeat artifact here. Another one over here, and then a few others which have peaks that seem to be localized to the 0 time point there. All of those are artifacts, and we do not analyze. Of the remaining ones, there appear to be a few that have significant differences within them. That one, and that one. Previous research has focused on the interval of 200 to 600 milliseconds. So that's what we focused on, and that leaves us just those two. And so when we do a 3 and 7. Just two. So this is something significant as well. But because we're interested in empathy, all the results people have just been looking at the 200 to 600 millisecond window and showing stuff there. So that's for like later. I don't know why that is. It's something crazy. Okay, so then we run parametric statistics on those ERPs that allows us to control for multiple comparisons. And then we find a significant difference. So in particular, there's this frontal cluster, which is localizing to the anterior prefrontal cortex. And that has a more negative ERP than in the audiovisual condition than in the visual only condition. The hearing heartbeats while looking at the same set of eyes reduces this, or makes this component more negative. Then there's also this parietal cluster, which is localizing to the superior parietal cortex, and that has kind of an inverse effect. It's more positive associated with the audiovisual condition, and more negative associated with the visual only condition. And that is probably due to the multisensory processing and linguistic parts of this task. But the main results are that differences in the HEP, there were differences in the HEP between these two, which means that listening to the heartbeat of someone else had an effect upon our own cardiac cortical processing. And then also that the audiovisual condition had a more negative frontal HEP than the frontal, in the frontal cluster. So the summary of this is that when participants heard the heartbeat of another person, their heartbeat evoked potential changed, and their cardiac cortical attention decreased. So now getting to the discussion. And I'm gonna frame this all in terms of its significance to music. So listening empathically to a sound that resembled the tactics of music decreased listeners' cardiac cortical attention. This is probably because their cardiac cortical attention shifted to the external beat. This cortical mechanism may underlie empathic listening to music. Another result, listening empathically to a sound that resembled the tactics of music decreased listeners' heart rate. Perhaps this is due to the shift in cardiac cortical attention, or related to that. But in general, empathic listening to music decreases heart rate. Listening empathically to a sound that resembled the tactics of music changed cognitive empathy. In music, the beat was probably heard as effective information. There's some sort of effective cue that's embedded in the beat. This has a lot to do with this literature on perceived emotions in music. When we can perceive an emotion in music without it affecting us, that is, in my perspective, has to do a lot with cognitive empathy. Finally, listening empathically to a sound that resembled the tactics of music increased affective empathy. The beat increased affective connection to that person. This has to do with induced emotions in music, which is the actual ability to feel an emotion of music. To me, that is mapping into effective empathy. So conclusion, why is the heart a prominent lyrical metaphor for feeling? It's because the heart is a locus of feeling, both perceived and induced. When do we feel with music? When we listen empathically to music, especially its tempo. Why does the beat of music resemble a heartbeat? To alter listeners' cardiac cortical attention. So, audience input. Can the heartbeat be used as an empathic technology? Yay! Okay, thanks very much.
That was good. Yeah. I didn't really know what to expect, and I kind of like as you started talking about stuff like that, I don't know what was going on there. So I'm like, you can bring. Okay. So I'm like, maybe you understand. And I'm like, but for the parts that I did understand, I'm like, okay, this is what I'm coming up with. Like, I don't know who's on your committee. I'm fairly certain Bruce is gonna ask me. So I'm like, okay, how are they gonna drill? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, like, as far as, so I'm just trying to walk through the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, like, where's the heartbeat sound come from? That maybe that, but I was also the basis, the biggest thing. How do you guys agree on what's going to be the thing? And then as I started thinking, it sounds like you got the most meaningful, maybe from my perspective, data came from situations where it was and why do you think that is? Like, what are, I guess, maybe you kind of addressed it earlier, but like, what do you think is going on inside the person where their heartbeat is changing based on the fact that their perception of that individual emotion that they think the person is having doesn't match the heartbeat that they think we should have for that person?
Yeah, I don't know. So I think this is showing how cognitive empathy is also impacting your heart rate. So it's empathy in general, but cognitive and affective components both seem to be having an effect. So when the incongruent condition is when you have an incongruency, this has in this study the ability to show that you change your perspective. From my perspective, actually, so this study measures changes, but it's possible that your cognitive empathy has changed without a behavioral response. So that person might seem more terrified, but I wouldn't, because I hear their heartbeat that's fast, but I can't register that change in this study. So I'm not really sure how to look at that, but so in this study where we have the incongruency between those two cases, I think this maybe is a lot like the audio only condition in terms of heart rate, because they're both like significantly lower, whereas when the two are congruent, it seems to increase the heart rate.
Could it be cultural? Could it be experiential? Could it be just something that's innate within us?
Yeah.
And at the same time, what if somebody, maybe with like a social disorder like autism?
Yeah.
A scenario which I guess would be much less violent.
Yeah. 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 So there. One of the reasons I use the reading the mind and the eyes task is that it actually has been associated or used to help diagnose autism. People who don't do very well on that, like significantly below the mean, also suffer from other emotional difficulties. And so, but however, what's really interesting about autism is that their perception of music is actually seemingly not affected. They still enjoy music. They can dance to music, do all those sorts of things. So in the case of autism in particular, I think that the addition of a tempo, the addition of an auditory beat could be a very effective cue as to that they're observing emotional state. Also something that could help mediate and represent their level of arousal to a caregiver. Yeah.
And to respond, they're like, that sounds like a great idea. I'll have one of my future PhD students investigate the connection.
Yeah, that's a great idea once I graduate.
Yeah. That's how it's like, oh, that sounds like a great study idea. We'll look into that after I once y'all get this degree. Have somebody do that. Okay. Yeah, I can't. Overall, it was dope.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Oh, good.
Yeah, my only question was,
Where did that come from? You guys know something really interesting is that that heartbeat sound is not actually a heartbeat. It is someone put a contact microphone on their finger and like tapped it. Yeah, yeah, really. Which I think speaks to actually the fact that this is something that extends beyond just the heartbeat. So that actually is evidence that it's not specific to the heart, even though it does sound like a heart, and people no one questioned that at all, even myself. That this is something that actually extends to beats in general. But it does sound like a heartbeat, and the person who put it online called it a heartbeat and said this is, and I chose it because it was the most realistic heartbeat sound. Because I think in general it's like there's not a right way to measure the heartbeat. I mean, you hear heartbeats in movies all the time. Those don't sound like stethoscopes.
yeah, it's like our mental conception of a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and that's kind of like obviously based on what I do. Like I'm looking at everything through a cultural thing.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about like, maybe somebody who's from an underprivileged population might not know what a heartbeat sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
That would be dope. But then again, that's all sex right. Like, oh, let's have this poor kid that's never heard anything. You know.
Yeah.
But I want to lean towards it sounds like it could be something that's like innate, something that's primal within us. But at the same time,
well, there's also evidence from prenatal auditory condition. So in gestation, 24 weeks after your auditory system is fully developed, and at this point, you can start to associate changes in your neurochemical state, like from your mom, with like changes in her heart rate. So when her heart rate goes up, you also have some of the cortisol coming into your blood-brain barrier. So you start to associate a fast heartbeat with like a change in your physiology. So there's that route. There's that possible innate universal route.
well, this is dope. You know, like I'm really thinking about like anxiety disorder, right? Like, say for example, somebody who grew up in a household where there's like a lot of violence and yelling.
Right.
And if you listen to samples of somebody who might be yelling but isn't yelling in anger, it's like, oh, like you should have scored the football, and then that stressed the person.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's dope. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm just like,
thanks.
wow, I can see how this could be a flip. Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, I get to you.
Oh man, thank you. I wish you were on my committee. So yeah. I have like 10 minutes. 15 minutes.
Could you go back to the beginning?
Yeah.
I just kind of like want to do as thorough as possible.
Sure. Let's go all the way to the beginning.
Yeah.
So you really, in the beginning, you filled out those 3 questions.
Yeah.
And I was like, where are you going with these 2 questions? And the fact that you followed up,
It's better.
that helped.
So when you saw these questions, what were your thoughts?
I was like, no, I thought you breezed through them really quickly, and so I could quite comprehend them.
Oh, okay.
I was in all right, listening,
Yeah.
kind of went through them really fast.
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't think they resonated, and then you went into, okay, cool, they didn't quite get home.
All right. So maybe I'll spend a few extra time on these first 2 slides.
Because at least for me, I feel exactly like I was trying to understand what you were talking about. So I'm like, okay, these are the questions. And I don't think it really connected. So like, but again, I'm not in your committee probably won't have this issue. Hopefully. But for me, I'm like, okay, I'm waiting to see what I'm seeing.
Okay. Okay.
And they weren't grounded in anything, and I was like, well, and I think don't know.
What do you mean by grounded?
Why they're motivating questions.
Why are they?
Or how it, because I came in without any context.
Okay.
And yeah, maybe we'll have much more interview, but
Okay. Yeah.
but,
Well, this is really just like I feel I can get. I don't want to get rid of this. This is like this is a really huge scope, and it's like just for like.
no, I love these questions,
Okay.
and I love that you follow up in the end. I thought that was brilliant.
Okay.
I don't want you to remove it. I
Okay.
just wanted to slow down. And let it hit. Because when it was a lot.
Okay.
So it didn't. I was like, how do you get connection? I couldn't quite get the connection into it. And then towards the end, when you followed up, I was like, oh, okay, now I get it.
Okay. So maybe I can read them out and like give 5 or 10 seconds of silence even or something like that.
I don't know how you like that. It was one of those, either you answer them as you go, or
Okay. Okay. I could just say like I'm not gonna answer these questions right now, but I am gonna like give answers, give some ideas for what this contributes to these later on.
I like that. Yeah.
Okay. You're first? Okay.
You first. You're first. Right? Every time I go, like, what?
You skipped over the question on the empathic side.
Oh, right. That was a mistake. That was supposed to be the lead into the next one, but I think I must have like, do we empathize with internal physiological states? Voila, maybe we do. So I think I just didn't. I think that was just a little performance snafu.
Don't know if you want numbers on these slides or not.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
So, like, which slide is this?
Let me grab my note. Right now I am. Actually, no, I'm not. You can.
Can I take
Yeah. Sure. Is this week crazy for you guys too?
Absolutely. I'm just.
So slide numbers.
Yeah, I think most of
Oh yeah. Not very accessible. Okay. Oh yeah. Change color and. Nice. Cool. Man, thanks guys. Thanks for coming, guys.
Oh yeah. I do well. Just for like my own knowledge, how many different stimuli? How many different visits?
36.
36, and they were different races. Or?
Dude, they were all the same race.
Really?
Yeah, I don't like that either.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that was it.
The participants were not all white. They were Georgia Tech undergrads, but I need to include that side as well.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm gonna assume it was like the birds.
Yeah, demographics. Yeah, there were the context of these. They were made like in the UK, and I guess in the UK people, you know, I don't know. Anyways, they were also made like I'm not gonna pretend.
Okay, so yeah, just participants. Maybe I don't know. For me, like I'm just very. I want to know like the impetus of the thinking behind the way this thing lies. So that was why I was like, okay, what is the heartbeat question? Or how is this heartbeat designed? And I know you probably want to hold that until the end with the whole, wrapping it up. Part or whatever. But you just say like these are like the traits that a heartbeat is composed of. That really make it those environments.
Okay. Okay.
And then this visual stimuli, like according to a few other studies, like that. Those are kind of like my experiences.
Okay.
Because everything else was laid out fine, like it was executed in a way that made sense. I just didn't know what cases.
Okay.
I only use this one.
Oh,
So.
I'm the odd one out.
No, you're fine. I think Jess used something.
Yeah. That's what Melody was saying. You know what those stimuli were called? Yeah, because that'd be great. Because Melody, I also met with Melody, and she was like, "Why did you just use eyes? Why didn't you use the whole face?"
I wonder if Jess either created her own or.
Yeah. There's also a possibility.
Oh no. It seemed very visceral when I was looking at the
Oh. No, Jess separated it out. So Jess did mouth versus eyes versus.
Oh.
Yeah. Actually,
Ready to go? Yeah. And it also makes me think about like this whole concept of incongruency. Like, what if you're hearing a very like upbeat, happy, like theater instrumental, and somebody with like very sad lyrics?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that would change your perception of the lyrics. You probably would feel like less like connected altogether. I think that's part of that because of this incongruency.
Yeah, like that beat that was just like
yeah,
myself.
yeah, like I don't know.
I couldn't clean up.
Like if somebody like sends you a really kind of, I don't know, you mean like with the text messages and emojis, for example, you add the smiley face, then people really know that it's like a happy.
Oh yeah, like I hate my life like well. We say that fairly frequently, unfortunately.
Yeah.
With something that's like, oh, I'm having a terrible day, smiley face. I'd be like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
Is that a typo?
So we're like aiming for a semester demo session. So a lot of like master
Well, congrats, man. I thought it was dope.
Thank you.
You should be fine.
Hope so.